Let's take a look at the astrology of the man of the hour, Elon Musk, and try to understand why I'm a little bit concerned about this, if there wasn't already enough reason to be concerned about this guy.
Thank you.
We're going to start with some rather benign stuff that defines who he is, his identity, his aspirations in life, everything that we know about him. And then we're gradually going to start digging into some of the red flags that are strategically sprinkled all over his chart, including one major red flag that should really get your attention. Alright, so first of all, we have Cancer Ascendant and Cancer Sun here, double Cancer, a lot of Cancerian energy. This makes someone very sensitive, and sensitivity is not necessarily goodness, it's not necessarily empathy.
He feels with incredible purity the emotion that he is feeling at the time, whatever that emotion is. He feels things very, very deeply.
Sensitivity means attunement, it means that internal and external stimuli have more effect on you. That's not necessarily a good thing. This is actually something that covert narcissists like to play a lot on, portraying their sensitivity as empathy, as goodness, as caring. Being overly affected by your experiences is not always a good thing. If you have good experiences, then it's a very good thing. If you have negative experiences, it's a very bad thing. You're more susceptible to those negative experiences seeping deep into your psyche. But in any case, we don't have a red flag yet. This is just an overly sensitive person who's going to be very susceptible to his early childhood experiences.
While he was a little boy, he grew up in a very violent home.
We have the sun here in the first house. Yes, I'm using whole sign and equal houses at the same time. Most of what I'm going to talk about in this video applies perfectly well to Placidus. Now, although the sun would be in the equal and Placidus 12th house, for me it is mainly in this first whole sign house. Someone with the sun in the first house is going to be recognizable, they're going to have a presence, they're going to be highly visible, they're going to have a drive for authority, and they're going to be a little bit selfish and authoritarian.
Within a few months, he posts this tweet around the Super Bowl, and he notices that this tweet gets less engagement than the tweet by President Joe Biden. Elon does not like this. He calls an urgent meeting and tasks 80 engineers to quickly rebuild a version of the algorithm that will allow his tweets to be artificially boosted by a factor of 1,000. Elon, the free speech guy, was like, I need you to boost my account because it's not getting as much attention as the president.
Whereas someone with the sun in the 12th house is going to be a little bit of a recluse, is going to like to be behind the scene, doesn't really like the public spotlight. Which one of those is more true about Elon? I'll let you decide. Now, this sun does have a 12th house influence by virtue of being in the 12th equal house. As I said, I use both at the same time. And the 12th house has to do with detachment, very long distances, like going to Mars, like space. Space is ruled by Pisces and the 12th house. And of course, that's a big part of Elon Musk's identity. But there's also other important placements in the actual whole sign 12th house here of Gemini. We have Venus and Saturn. Now, Venus in the 12th house indicates a proper, genuine love for space, for long distances, for the idea of going to Mars. He really is passionate about that, I believe. Now, were it not for this Saturn, Elon would probably just be a daydreamer, someone who spends all his days in his basement collecting Star Wars merch or whatever. But this cold hard Saturn gives him the discipline and the work ethic to actually pursue his goals in a pragmatic, practical way. Now, very importantly, this 12th house of Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is right here conjunct the ascendant within half a degree. Very important planet in Elon's chart. Of course, Mercury is the planet of technology, of intellectuality, of communication, things that very much define Elon Musk. But perhaps more importantly, we have the moon here, a major astrological element in the third house of Virgo. Third house is the original Gemini house, shares a lot of indications with Gemini. Think communications, logistics, intellectual endeavors, short distance travels rather than long distances. And Virgo obviously is another Mercury sign indicating a detail orientation, again an intellectual and technologically oriented nature. Virgo energy is very precise, very meticulous, very technical. The moon represents our basic filter, how we see reality, how reality reflects in our consciousness. We can say for sure that Elon sees the world in this very technical and detail-oriented way. This house is also ruled by Mercury. Mercury also rules Virgo. And so this Mercury brings into his ascendant, into his outward worldly identity, very important elements of the third house as well. In fact, looking back 100 years from now, we might say that third house things are actually more important in defining who Elon Musk was than even 12th house things. Think communication like Starlink and his purchase of X. Think short distance commute and travel, think Tesla. In any case, this combination of the 12th house and the third house under the very technologically oriented influence of Mercury is something that very much defines who Elon Musk is. Now, enough for the obvious stuff. Do we have any red flags here? Well, we do have some potentially minor red flags. On their own, they're not a big deal unless something else is also going on in the chart. Venus in the 12th house can be a minor red flag. It can indicate an avoidant attachment style. I don't really know what Elon's relationships, marriages are about. I have really no idea. I haven't looked into it. So if you know something about that, if this makes sense, let me know in the comments. Someone who has Venus in the 12th house, and oh, by the way, also the 7th house lord Saturn in the 12th house, is more susceptible to divorce. As I said, to an avoidant attachment style, problems in keeping relationships. Now we know that's true about Elon's business relationships, that he just discards whenever he feels slightly inconvenienced. His romantic relationships, I don't know. You tell me in the comments.
Sorry, I went into my therapist's office and he had left a message for her to tell me that he was filing for divorce. So that was how I found out.
In any case, by itself, a minor red flag. We have Mercury and the Sun here on the ascendant. Minor red flags if something else is going on to indicate that this can be a problem. You know, the authoritarian, self-centered nature of the Sun in the first house can be a problem. The potentially manipulative, scheming, deceiving, and trolling nature of Mercury in the first house can be a problem. We know Elon is a little bit of a troll. We already know that he lies. He just blatantly lies and makes up things and builds up his image on just false narratives. But is he just your regular billionaire who lies and cheats a little bit to get his way and get ahead? Or is there something more insidious about Elon Musk? Stay tuned. Now, something that worries me a little bit more is actually this loose square of Saturn to the moon. I don't really like to see anything of Saturn to Moon in the chart of someone who is so Cancerian and so sensitive. If it was an opposition or a conjunction, it would still be worrisome, but a square of Saturn to the Moon from the 12th house, let that sink in. This is an emotional coldness, and I would dare say does indicate a certain lack of empathy.
So, you know, I've heard it said that he's cold and emotionless, and that could not be further from the truth. He is the most emotional person I know.
Now, Elon, I think, has admitted to being in chronic depression. I think he has at least alluded to the darkness of his internal landscape.
I mean, my mind is a storm. I don't think most people would want to be me. They may think they would want to be me, but they don't know.
Is your storm a happy storm?
No.
This screams blocked and repressed emotions galore. Pretty big red flag here, considering everything else. With Uranus being here in the 4th whole sign house and squaring the Sun and the ascendant, that's another little bit of a red flag here. This is something that can really threaten your feeling of safety and security growing up. Now, I'm not giving that a major red flag because it's not super aligned, but it's there. Now, for someone who likes to portray high morals, ethics, and, you know, champions free speech and all this stuff, Jupiter is going to be a very important planet. Jupiter shows you your beliefs, your morals, your actual principles in life philosophy. Already the fact that it's in Scorpio raises some eyebrows because Scorpio is a dark, secretive sign. Placements that we have in Scorpio are not so obvious and we don't necessarily like to make them public all of the time. Add to that this opposition to Saturn. Now I have an opposition of Jupiter to Saturn in my birth chart. They're both in very good signs. Jupiter is exalted, Saturn is in Capricorn, and yet still there is this realistic, cold hard, cynical life philosophy that often prevails. Now, I don't have an aspect to any sensitive point like the moon, so I can't speak to that, but I know that in opposition to Jupiter, it does limit your ability to just be happy-go-lucky about things. or to just see the positive and good in everything. But the smoking gun really is Neptune here, which is the planet of deception, of illusion. This is someone, you know, with Jupiter opposite restricting and cold hard Saturn in dark and secretive Scorpio and conjunct Neptune. This is someone who may at best be misguided in their beliefs and principles, and at worst actively be misguiding others by displaying ethics and morals that are not truly his own. Given that we have actual proof that that's the case about Elon, given that he's championed freedom, free speech, yet X has done more censorship at the behest of the US government after Elon took control than before.
Since Musk took over, government censorship on Twitter has gone up. Musk's Twitter now says yes to government censorship over 80% of the time, way more than the old Twitter. Wait, what?
Saturn squared the moon in the 3rd house, the house of communication, the planet of freedom, also restricted by Saturn, and in conjunction to this deceptive Neptune. Red flag. Now, this Jupiter in the 5th house does speak to someone who is creative, curious, and intelligent, and considering everything else, I don't know if that's a good thing. But let's get to the placement that by far outweighs every other red flag in Elon Musk's natal chart and by far has me the most concerned. Now, let's not build any suspense, let's get right to it. This is what really worries me in Elon Musk's chart. We have Mars with the North Node in the 8th house. This is the whole sign 8th house, it's the equal 8th house, and if you're looking at Placidus, the 8th house cusp is about here. Before we detail what this might mean, let me make one thing clear. Saturn square moon, red flag. Small red flags. Little bit of a red flag here, bigger red flag here. Mars conjunct the North Node in the 8th house. This is what that is. Recently, I've looked a lot into the astrology of clinical narcissism and psychopathy. And one thing that is very consistent in making a clinical narcissist or psychopath is damage to one of the intimate houses, the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th, with the 8th having the most potential to cause trauma and psychological disorders. 8th house is a house of transformation, of crisis, of the hidden, of the occult, just like Scorpio. Toss in that explosive Mars in there, in this house that rules your subconscious mind. This is someone who harbors a lot of aggression, who was aggressed as a child, psychologically, perhaps even physically. This indicates growing up in a very uncertain and unstable environment.
Elon would be between the seats hitting his father to stop him punching me.
My father has serious issues.
Okay, well, so you didn't have a happy childhood.
It was very violent.
Elon said he wanted to go and live with his father, and that made me very sad.
The fact that there's the North Node here adds gasoline to this fire, because the North Node in the 8th house on its own can be very traumatizing. North Node represents unconventional circumstances, obsession. These two together scream psychological abuse. Note, if you want me to make a video on the astrology of clinical narcissism and psychopathy, let me know in the comments. Now, on the more benign end of the spectrum, when you see Mars in the 8th house, you tend to think of someone like a surgeon who goes and cuts up people but for a positive outcome, who goes and cuts people open but for a positive outcome, a firefighter who responds to emergency situations and leaps in the flames to save someone. Perhaps a CIA MI6 intelligence officer who works in secretive environments represented by that 8th house, and combining that very masculine Martian element. These are some of the professions that you'll generally see associated with a Mars in the 8th house. Unsurprisingly, these are also the professions where psychopathy tends to be overrepresented. Now, this Mars in the 8th house in Elon's chart also rules this 10th house, the house of career, vocation, and authority, which in Elon's case does have a lot to do with Mars and with pioneering something about Mars. Remember, the North Node represents novelty, pioneering, ingenuity, inventing something. charting a new path. He wants to go to Mars. He wants to pioneer something having to do with his Mars. But most important for us is understanding what this placement says about Elon's nature, and possibly some not so obvious implications, since we are talking about the North Node and the 8th house, which are both not very obvious and not very straightforward. Something about his vocation in the world actually has to do with this 8th house more than anything else. Does that mean he's an undercover asset working with the intelligence services for some kind of covert goal? We already saw that he wasted no time in making Starlink available as a military installation for conflicts around the world.
Director of operations at one of his companies, and the mother of a set of Elon's twins. And Elon, in a text that read, "You don't have to be in a state of war all the time. Or is that where you find greater comfort, when you're in periods of war?" And he replies that it's a part of his default setting. The guy is addicted to conflict and crisis and tension and drama.